It's been months since global temperature records were shattered, but the heat hasn't let up. Not even close.
And we've never really experienced a heat wave like this before.
Coming up, the 1.5 degree line we swore we'd never cross might just become another milestone we blow past.
It will probably be something that in a couple of years we'll look back and say, oh, that's when we crossed it.
A new report exposes how what governments promise has nothing to do with what they actually deliver.
We're barely hitting $1.12. I mean, be honest, why is it being dressed up as a success?
So that's sort of what made us, want to do this report and dig a little bit deeper.
And with pledges piling up and progress falling short, can leaders finally walk the talk?
Governments are starting to get really excited.
Just 2 degrees is on. Now.
Well, it's actually quite nice to have a bit of good news to share for once.
Long before summer officially arrived, seasons were already shifting. Winter felt like it ended early, spring came in warm, and summer showed up before it was even invited.
It is unusual. I mean, I can't remember the last time it was this warm, but I'm enjoying it.
And sure, you may think early blooms and milder winters are a good thing, but they are not. They're signs of something big happening, and those signs are everywhere.
It's a lot of heat, and it's very difficult to stay out.
And it was a pretty chaotic moment, and it was a very serious situation where we had to get these animals out of here.
And erratic weather isn't just happening in the north, it's out of whack in the southern hemisphere too. One minute it's freezing, the next it's practically tropical. And it's not just in one place. From Africa to South America, Australia, the seasons just aren't playing by the rules anymore. So with all this talk about heat, where do we stand when it comes to average global temperatures? Well, researchers think they have the answer. Hey, Aimee, so this report basically says we could cross 1.5 degrees by the year 2028. What happens that year if we breach it?
So the crossing of the 1.5 degrees, of course, is also, we tend to take it over a longer period. So it will be difficult to say, oh, we're bridging it in this specific year while we're experiencing it. So it will probably be something that in a couple of years we'll look back and say, oh, that's when we crossed it. Because it's an average, of course. We're looking at longer climatic timescales, and we might already cross it on occasionally like an annual basis. But when we really say, okay, we're crossing this threshold for that we set in the Paris Agreement, that's something that will need a bit more time to really say, okay, that's when we crossed it. Of course, this 1.5 degrees is not a magic number. It's a number that we agreed upon in the Paris Agreement. But it's really every 1/10 of a degree of warming that matters when it comes to climate change, right? It's not like after 1.5 degrees, all of a sudden everything falls apart. It just becomes worse with every 1/10 of a degree. So it's really every 1/10 of a degree that matters.
So what's the benefit of tracking these 10 indicators every year? What can we catch in real time that we might miss, I guess, in the bigger 7-year cycle?
I think it's really important to have this annual reminder of what's happening, an annual update. Okay, what's happening to the temperature? What's happening to our carbon emissions? Are we reaching a peak in the carbon emissions already? Have they peaked and are we declining? And the answer so far is no.
So land, the Earth has already warmed by 1.79 degrees Celsius, well past the 1.5 degree red line. Why isn't that setting off more alarm bells globally, you think?
Yeah, so we know already that land is always warming faster. So this 1.5 degrees is a global average. So that includes the oceans as well. And the oceans take up a big portion of our planet. And we know that the land is heating faster than the ocean. We know that the Arctic again is heating warmer than the mid-latitudes. So we know about these changes, and these regional differences are really important. And that's also what we did in the IPCC report. There was a lot more focus on these regional differences. So I think these regional variations are more and more considered, more and more taken into account. But yeah, it's really the metric that we're looking at. If it's a global average, we're looking at this 1.5 degrees for a global mean, and that includes indeed a larger warming on land.
So with 90% of that heat going into the ocean, are we ignoring a ticking time bomb? Indeed,
a lot of energy is going into the ocean, but luckily it takes a lot of energy to heat water. So it's less effect, like we put way less energy into, for instance, the ice sheets and into the atmosphere, but they react much stronger to that. So they warm up way faster. And this ocean is saving, it's basically a huge buffer in the climate system, and it's buffering a lot of this additional energy. But of course it has consequences, because it means the ocean is warming. It's slow, but it's still warming, and that warming causes the water to expand, and that causes sea level rise. And sea level rise is, of course, an issue for countries all around the world, low-lying countries at the coast, threatening coastal populations.
Your research says that only 130 gigatons of carbon dioxide is left in the 1.5 degree Celsius budget, and we're burning through it very fast. How close are we really to crossing that limit?
This 130 gigatons comes with an uncertainty band. So it means that we could cross the threshold slightly sooner, or would cross it a bit later. But yeah, if you look at the average carbon emissions over the past decade, then in about 3 years, we would have burnt through this carbon budget that we compute as being the budget available to stay under this 1.5 degrees. So that's awfully little. Yes.
So your report isn't just charts and models, it's full of warnings. What do you want world leaders to do this year and not in 2030?
Well, I think the science is clear, and it has been for quite a while, that what we need to do is reduce greenhouse gas emissions. That's really the number one thing we can and need to do in order to reduce climate change. But politics is relatively slow, and we really need to speed up the action in order to keep up with this climate change, because the climate change is speeding up as well. So we're really in this race trying to beat climate change, and I guess we need to work harder as a world in order to achieve our goals.
Aimee, what do you feel the Earth is going to look? Aimee, let me just fix my camera, because we've got a really aggressive cat here. Yeah, buddy. Oh, yes, my friend. What do you feel the Earth is going to look and sound like in a mere 5 years?
We will see more droughts. We will see more heat waves. but we will also see more extreme rain, for instance. So it's really swinging all across the extremes, and that's where we notice it, and that's where it also comes closest to people, I would suppose. That's when the person on the street indeed experiences way hotter summers, way drier summers, huge rain, flooding events. So that's where climate change, it is here and it is now. And with every amount of warming, we will see this more and more.
By the way, it is about 33 degrees Celsius in Istanbul right now. Historical average is 27 degrees Celsius. It is a hot day. I mean, Mickey, sweat. It's hot, right?
Yeah, it's
You're
super.
sweating a lot.
It's blisteringly hot.
Actually, let's take a moment to appreciate something wet, salty, and wildly misunderstood. It's sweat.
You wipe it off, mask the smell, and spend lots of money trying not to do it. But sweating is one of the most powerful tools your body's got, and it might just save your life. Sweat's a cocktail of water, salt, urea, ammonia, and trace minerals. Our body has millions of sweat glands, turning us into a walking, talking, heat-regulating machine. Sweat is why we can outrun just about any animal in a marathon. And it's why we're not passing out on the pavement every time summer hits. You sweat, you survive. Simple as that. But in a warming world, sweat is under pressure. When it's too hot and humid, sweat cannot evaporate off our body. It's like our skin's leaking, but the heat stays trapped. That's when sweat stops being a survival hack and starts being a red flag. So the next time you feel a trickle down your lower back, don't roll your eyes. Respect that sticky, salty drip, because sweat is our body begging the planet to cool it.
So one of the biggest climate conferences of the year took place in June in Bonn, Germany. And I don't know why, but there was very little media coverage about it. So, suspecting the worst, we called up our friends at Action Aid International for a good, bad, and ugly analysis. Hi, Teresa. Thanks for coming on the show. We look to you quite often because you go off to all these conferences and you really have a pulse on what's happening in the climate world. I'd love to do a good, bad, and ugly scenario with you because so many people are frustrated with conferences in general and are questioning whether or not they really are still relevant. So firstly, the conference has ended. What is one good thing that's come out of it?
Well, it's actually quite nice to have a bit of good news to share for once. It's not all bad news today. The good news is that governments are starting to get really excited about this concept of just transition. They've agreed to forward a draft text. It still needs some work, but it does represent a real sea change in ambition and priorities, actually. And they're agreeing to forward that text to COP30 later this year. This is coming at a really critical time because there is so much economic uncertainty in the world right now. People have so many challenges. They worry that climate action is going to affect their job security, make it harder to put food on the table or pay their bills. And we're in a time when people in community sense that they're being forced to choose actually between their immediate needs and a safe climate future. And yeah, maybe they have a point. If elites who don't even care about people are put in charge of climate policy, then same as any policy, there could be risks. So whether it's for the transition in energy from fossil fuels to renewables, or in agriculture from industrial agriculture to agroecology, you know, climate action has to be done with care and justice and participation of the real people who are going to be affected and part of that change. And we need to make sure that people who aren't already overstretched aren't further overloaded by maybe well-meaning but perhaps misguided climate action. So just transition means guiding and providing support for governments so that they put people actually at the center of climate action. And that means actually, in practice, it means making sure that there's support for training. If you need to change your livelihood or learn new skills, reskilling, economic and livelihood diversification support, or maybe even social protection payments so that you can weather disruption to your income. There's a whole list of things that just transitions should enable when climate action happens. And that hasn't really been central to the climate conversation so far.
Okay, let's balance this out. What has happened in Bonn that has not made you happy?
I mean, in the world, we know that temperature records are being broken every month pretty much this year so far, and governments at home at the same time seem to have taken their eye off the ball. You probably might agree with me that it feels like the urgent agenda of climate change has just slipped down the list of political priorities, but scientifically, you know, we're being told the opposite is true. This is more urgent than ever, and here rich countries aren't even committing to the bare minimum of action that's needed to keep the planet from runaway climate breakdown. I mean, countries are in the process right now of submitting their new climate commitments, their national plans. So far, we're just seeing a lethargy in those plans that is bewildering. And you'll remember, Reagan, that in COP29 last year in Baku, rich countries just flat out refused to commit to offer real finance to the global south countries, the ones that have been carrying the cost of climate change. And that means the global south has been left carrying the cleanup bill for the global north's climate wrecking party. So now it feels like we're actually reaping the bitter harvest from Baku. Countries here in the UN process that have done almost nothing to cause the climate crisis are becoming increasingly cautious about committing themselves to pay for actions that they simply can't afford and probably shouldn't even have to. So the question of finance, you know, the lack of real grant-based finance really continues to hang over everything, whether that's for cutting emissions, for adapting to climate action, or recovering from the impacts of loss and damage.
I hate to ask this question, but has anything happened at Bonn that has been horrendous or completely reprehensible in your opinion?
Well, yeah, it does even get worse, I'm sorry to say, because as part of the package from COP29 last year, there really were even more worrying elements that we're just starting to really understand what the implications are. Because now we see in Bonn negotiations, there's a really aggressive push for private finance to fill the gap. And developing countries, the global south, are being pushed to open up and create what's called enabling environments for private finance as a substitute for climate finance. And what that means is loans, opportunities for asset managers and corporate investors, and all of that, all with a profit motive that is supposedly going to help the climate. But you know, we know that those are the same actors that have caused the climate crisis in the first place. These guys are being told, you know, these guys are the solutions to fill the finance gap. And that's really, really worrying. I mean, debt is a major driver of the climate crisis. Countries that are in debt distress are being forced to cut investment in climate action. And then not only that, they're being forced to expand their export, often in fossil fuels or industrial agriculture, which themselves harm the climate, in order to repay their loans. So it's absolutely nonsensical and dangerous that rich countries are trying to push the global north into indebtedness under a climate flag, when what we really need is debt cancellation and new global debt restructuring mechanisms. So there's a really dangerous push for private finance as a climate solution right now. It's not being carefully scrutinized. It's almost certainly going to cause a lot of harm if not properly restrained.
After what you just said, it looks pretty bad, and I'm not surprised by that, by the way. But do you see anything hopeful coming out of Bonn?
The next COP30, is going to be in the city of Belém, in the heart of the Amazon. And farmers and indigenous peoples, local communities, they all really need climate action, and they need that climate action to be just. So the just transition mechanism being forwarded to COP30 negotiations really are an opportunity that everyone can be hopeful for and everyone needs to get behind.
So while there was a lot of talk in Bonn about climate ambition, a new report says that money isn't just lacking, it's going to all the wrong places. Additionally, it says that the Global South is getting left behind again. So we called up one of the authors of the Oil Change International report. It's titled Private Fantasies, Public Realities, Why Public Finance Isn't Delivering an Energy Transition, and the Case for Public Sector Leadership. The report flat out says the private sector first model is flopping. So why have governments been clinging to the idea?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what we see, and we just recently saw at the climate conference that happened in Bonn as part of like the UN climate conferences, is particularly global north countries. They're using this approach as a way to skirt their responsibilities. We know that they owe a massive amount of climate finance, and rather than sort of paying what they owe and maybe having to bring in policies and support initiatives and policies that would be more transformational to our global financial system, they're instead sort of saying that, oh, the private sector can pay the bulk of the finance. We don't need as much public finance, but that they can really fit the bill for the energy transition.
We were promised $7 in private money for every $1 of public finance. We're barely hitting $1.12. I mean, be honest. Why is it being dressed up as a success?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, and one that I think, especially when it comes to the energy transition, and what we kind of thought as we kept seeing these numbers and in models, we see, these claims, but then we didn't really see much evidence to back it up. And so we've heard, this approach has been used not just for the energy transition, but for development for decades, and kind of seeing we can take, billions in public money and transform it into trillions. But we were kind of questioning, like, we don't see that evidence, and there wasn't really a lot. So that's sort of what made us, want to do this report and dig a little bit deeper to sort of see the numbers, because we keep seeing these promises, but then there's not, really the data to substantiate it. And even still, as we were digging in, there's still a lot of data missing and lots of gaps to be able to really do it as comprehensively as I think would be ideal. But I think, again, it's a way for these governments. It's sort of like the easy way out for them. And so, of course, they are going to continue to cling on to that approach.
The Global South has nearly 70% of the world's people, but just gets 15% of transition funds. If this financial system is rigged, what would rebuilding it really look like?
We've just had this Financing for Development Summit that's taken place that looks at addressing global economic reform. And we have proposals like a UN Convention on Sovereign Debt that would help to set up a democratic forum to negotiate debt. As we know, we're in a global debt crisis, which is really constraining. A lot of Global South countries are having to spend, I think it's on average like 42% of their public funding just on debt repayments. And so obviously, if those debts were canceled, that would be a lot more money that could go to energy transition, to climate adaptation, to support development, poverty reduction, gender equality, all these types of things that are so needed. So things like that, I think, taxing the rich, we know we're also inequality is at record high levels. And for most of us, paying an energy bill might feel hard while we have this small group of elite that are flying around taxing the fossil fuel industry. They're also making record profits at a time when, the planet is burning. And so there are all of these proposals that are out there that could really shift our economic system and that could raise the money. I think sometimes when we look at the overall costs of the energy transition, it feels really high, but it's actually, keeping within our current system is actually twice as expensive. And when we see, the money that is out there, there is that money. It's just really poorly allocated.
So $420 billion a year is what it would take for a fair fossil fuel phase out. But most major models don't even factor that in. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of costs, especially when it comes to things like, transitioning workers, ensuring supports for communities that have been maybe harder to quantify, and that they haven't included. I think, again, gets to some of the issues of the priorities of those doing the modeling and how much sort of justice is centered into that. And then again, sort of this private first approach is one where at the end of the day, it's about trying to make projects profitable. And, you know, that shouldn't be how we're guiding the climate crisis, our way out of the climate crisis. We need to be thinking about it differently. It shouldn't just be, you know, the things that get financed are those that can return a profit to private companies. But yeah, so I think it's a lot about like expanding sort of how we're thinking about this problem and then the solutions then that we use to tackle it.
That's a show. So it's pretty much getting hot everywhere as we keep reporting. Take Pakistan, for example. That has been experiencing highs of 50 degrees Celsius. The Indus River, which is a major source of food and jobs for millions of people, at the time we filmed this, looked as though it was drying up. And that will all change when the monsoon rains bring devastating floods and landslides. It's such a tough mix for people to deal with. Drought and then too much water. We'll see you next time. Bye.